Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our latest edition of TP Talks. I'm your moderator, Amit Shankadas, Executive Vice President at Teleperformance, and I'm joined by Brian Cantor. Brian is the Principal Analyst and CCW Digital Director at IQPC's Customer Management Practice. Welcome, Brian.
It's a pleasure to be here. Can't wait to dive into what is such a timely and such an impactful topic.
It is, Brian. It is, and you know the recent events have led us to where we are in the U.S. market, and the challenge with the U.S. market labor dynamics is it's tough for everybody, and not just our industry. I think many industries have been impacted by this, but it's so you're right. It's a very germane topic. It's a topic that a lot of folks are challenged with, and the more we can learn and leverage expertise and research that you folks have, the better. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. You can manage your console very easily. This is a very dynamic platform. You'll see, by the way, there's some resources available to you. There's a white paper. There's links to future TP Talks if you're interested. This TP Talks is created to be highly interactive. So we received lots of questions, but there is a chance for you to submit questions. Please do so. We will address them as best as we can get to them during the webinar. If you have technical issues, there's a little help link. Click on that. If you'd like to reach us outside, there's a little email icon. You can reach us there. We thought we'd make this a little more fun and dynamic. So rather than listen to me and introduce to you what TP Talks is, we have a brief video, and then we will jump right into the conversation with Brian. So here's a video that'll introduce your hosts, Teleperformance, and TP Talks. Great. For those of you who don't know Brian, and that's probably just a handful of you folks, but I thought maybe I could introduce him slightly. Brian leads the customer experience, contact center, and technology and employee engagement research initiatives for CCW Digital. He authors CMP's industry-leading market studies, special reports. He also serves as the managing editor and director for CCW Digital, which is, by the way, the largest web publication and community for customer experience professionals. So clearly, Brian brings a lot of experience and expertise with him. Brian, let's get right to it. I think enough around the intros. So we're sitting in this world of, we've talked about, everybody's familiar with the labor shortage. That's nothing new, right? Record low unemployment in the United States, higher expectations for wages, alternatives, flexibility in work environments. Look at us, we're still all working from home. Growth in digital services where transactional type work is being managed by bots maybe, yet there is still a huge human aspect for it. From your market studies, your research, where is this headed? Where are we? Where is it headed?
Yeah, well, I think the important thing to look at is that there's ultimately 5 factors that we've identified that are exacerbating the broader labor challenge and making it particularly tricky and challenging for the customer contact space. So first of all, there's the idea that COVID, the year and a half of isolation, of quarantine, of separation, really caused people to reevaluate how they think about the career. They're looking at their pay scales differently. They're looking at whether jobs truly fit for them. They're reassessing their career goals. And unfortunately, when we've historically positioned customer service roles as jobs, things you do to get a paycheck, not necessarily things that you invest yourself in, when suddenly people are starting to reevaluate their priorities, unfortunately, that works very negatively toward the contact center world because it doesn't often pass that muster. It hasn't felt like a career, and therefore you lose people there. Now, with that, it's not just that they're being dreamers and reaching for the pie in the sky. The fact is, thanks to work from home, thanks to economic growth in certain sectors, there's more opportunity for employees right now. They can work wherever they want for a variety of different companies, and therefore they don't have to settle for that paycheck, that job, those rote repetitive tasks, and can instead look for what they want, which again means that the contact center role, if it doesn't redefine itself, risks missing out on those people. Another thing that's key, the rising value of core benefits. So years ago, CCW would run surveys about what matters most in the agent experience. And often things like salary tested very low. And it makes sense, right? Because once you have the job, yeah, you might hate the negotiation, you might hate the salary process, but once you have the job, what you're getting paid doesn't matter nearly as much as how much you like your work, how easy your tools are to use, and that sort of thing. But now, at a time where people are hearing that we're seeing a lot more emphasis on the salary, it does matter. I've spoken to several people in the industry who said they've lost numerous agents to competitors over things as seemingly trivial as an extra $1 an hour. So what you're paying matters so much right now. And if we're not ascribing the appropriate value to the contact center, we're going to risk losing employees and struggling to acquire them as well. We also have flexibility matters a lot. So I know that not everyone's in position to be as flexible as they would like. There are constraints and challenges, but the simple reality is those who are not at least clear in what their job will look like, but ideally as flexible to things like work from home and different hours and scheduling options and multitudes of tasks that people are working on, that flexibility is going to matter and weigh on the minds of potential recruits. And if you're not offering it, you could run into some trouble. And then finally, there's the talent aspect. So if you take those 4 previous points, you may say this is where the contact center is falling short or where it's not delivering what it needs to attract talent. But the fact is, now that the role is becoming more demanding, we're looking for more creativity, more critical thinking, more empathy. It's hard to find those people. It's easy to find someone who can read a script. It's hard to find someone who can meaningfully empathize with customers. And so in that sense, also, even if we did everything right, we paid right, we defined the role right, we were really bought into it, we still may struggle to find the right talent for today's new normal and what customers are demanding.
Yeah, so Brian, it's really interesting because when you look at the concept of what a contact center was, a call center, people looked at it in the past versus what it needs to be defined as today is significantly different. It's interesting, by the way, in many offshore markets, this very same role is considered a career, is considered a starting point to a career, but is considered a career. And you see that growth, by the way, which is manifested in lower attrition rates, et cetera, in those locales. But I want to pick up on one point, the last point you hit on around the right talent or skill or the changing profile of the agent, of how we should not just be thinking about it and positioning, but also, what's that X factor we're looking for in an agent? How do companies help close that skill gap? What should companies be looking for?
Yeah, and this is one where, a lot of times we can fault the contact center community for being behind the times and not adapting. But this is not one of those cases. The fact is, the community knows what it needs. The challenge is just finding it. And what it needs, and we actually ran this as part of a market study over the summer, identifying what the contact center leadership identifies as essential roles for employees and agents to possess. And they're really bracketed into a few areas. There is the ability to emotionally connect, the ability to work independently, and the ability to work with higher degrees of complexity. So the number one factors were having empathy and friendliness. And at the end of the day, the human connection still matters greatly. And in fact, we have data showing that when a customer interacts with an agent who is friendly, they're 95% more likely to become loyal to that brand. So even in the era of digital communication and all that, being able to engage with them still matters a lot. You also have then the next two factors were the ability to quickly master complex products and processes and the ability to handle different types of interactions. So on the one hand, we know that self-service is absorbing simpler tasks, which means that the agent has to be able to do more unpredictable things that are not just, oh, yes, here's how you reset your password, or it's a 90-day return policy, or here's when your payments due, but things that are not as easily attainable on the FAQ page or the knowledge base. Additionally, there's more tasks because we know that today's customers, they have so many different options. By the time they get to an agent, they certainly don't want to transfer. I mean, they never like transfers, but now it's really insulting to ask someone to transfer, which means that answering different types of questions, pivoting from customer relationship management to de-escalation to sales all in one call, that's a more realistic job trajectory right now for our agents, and therefore they have to have those multiple skills. And then finally, we also have things along the lines of de-escalating things without supervisor guidance. And we know that, and I'm sure this will come up a little bit throughout the discussion as well, we know that work from home is here to stay, at least in some capacity. We know that we're looking at distributed workforce models, and that means that you're going to be working more independently. And if you're not in position to thrive independently, to make decisions, to be creative, to act on your own, and to handle emotionally heated interactions on your own, you're not going to be a great fit for today's contact center environment.
Yeah, so clearly, Brian, consultative, creative thinking, free thinking agent type personnel is what we're looking for. Customers clearly expect a contact center to handle the more complex interactions, to your point, with an aura of empathy, with critical thinking, with personalization. So it's a changing profile of the agent type that we're looking for, the individual we're looking for. What do you think this profile looks like going forward? What's the profile of the future? What should companies be looking for? And then we'll kind of jump into how we source some of that. But
yeah, so I think the biggest thing is going to be this: we really have to re-emphasize the human part of this role. I mean, if you go back, it was always, we used to trumpet things like hire the smile, train the skill. And yet over time, the roles evolved into a very skills, just remember a few facts, read a few scripts type role. And that's not going to work anymore. The profile really is one of an analyst, a consultant, an advisor. And with that, there has to be two things that come into play, because yes, at the end of the day, these are frontline roles too. So it's unrealistic to say you're going to get some Harvard MBA business analyst to answer your calls on the front line. I don't think that's a realistic model, but I think you want to start building a career trajectory that is supportive of this person's going to learn what customers want and how to adapt to that. And then they're going to grow into how do we design better experiences, and then keep growing into how do we design better products and a better business. And so really building this as more of a growth as far as an analyst role, more as far as understanding the human factors, less about just answering questions. That's where you're going to start to attract the right talent. Now, don't get me wrong. There's still always going to be a need for people to answer questions, because bots are not perfect yet. People are still calling even for simple issues. And so it doesn't mean that you have to abandon every agent you have. It doesn't mean you have to start paying people $300,000 a year to work in your call center. It instead means that you have to define that there is going to be an agent who is more than a frontline person, and instead a valuable business driver of creativity and problem solving.
So Brian, actually, I'm going to take a question, if you don't mind, real quick. And let me read this question to you. It says, now that a majority of contact center employees are working from home, what is the most important way businesses need to flex and retain them long term? And I bring that up because you alluded to kind of the changing nature and the flexibility and what's happening from a work environment.
So one of the things, first of all, and this is going to sound crazy because most people probably working from home get why they want to work from home, but I actually think it's important for the business to articulate why it's offering work from home. It can't just be because the market's doing it or because of COVID or because of problems, but really build into your training, into your culture, into your workflow, why this makes sense for you. have transparency around the fact that now we're allowing people to be in an environment that's less stressful, free of distractions. We're allowing ourselves to hire people from around the world who can connect with different skill sets and connect with different types of problems and answer at different times of the day. Understanding why work from home is valuable, what's going to do is two things. One, you're going to attract people who believe in this model, who are committed to working in this model. But two, you're also going to self-affirm people that they know that they agree with your culture because you understand why working from home is so valuable. Additionally, what you want to be looking at too is you have to start to really remap out the workflows that are going to be supportive of what they're going through. So this means that, yes, being able to say, I get that right now you're in a noisy house. Maybe I'm going to just route you to, you're going to focus on our chat and text-based support right now, not answer as many calls. Being able to understand that there will be variables that they're facing that don't exist in the traditional office and actually be able to do something about it as opposed to saying, man, you need to go to WeWork or something because it's not working. You know, really understanding exactly how the work from home dynamic is existing and then building around that. Also, flexibility can't be a half measure. So on the one hand, you can't say, well, we want you to work from home to be flexible, but you better be in your seat from 9 to 5 and you can never take a vacation. You can never take lunch. You have to answer emails all day. Part of work from home, it's not just a shift in where you're working. It's a shift in how you think about work. And if you don't build flexibility into your other processes, it's going to be a mistake. And then finally, allowing people to develop their specialization. You know, we talk about things, when we talk about work from home, we often talk about gig models and using like an Uber-like approach to work. Well, we got to mean that. And we got to say that if you are going to be someone who just answers calls during the holidays, that's fine. If you're going to be more of a salesperson who can start to close deals off your mobile phone, running around and traveling all day, that's fine too. So actually making sure that the work aligns with the different specializations people are going to have, because now they're no longer conforming to what your robotic idea of a contact center agent is. You're adapting to the different people you have, and why not build the best possible workflow for them?
Yeah, and to that last point, Brian, you know, we were talking about this earlier. Diversity is another key thing. You know, we surveyed at Teleperformance. We surveyed our existing and other folks for the interest and desire to work at home, work from home, excuse me. And interestingly, we found that, you know, there's certain situations that lend themselves, and there's certain lifestyle situations that lend themselves for individuals being willing and able to work at home predominantly versus in center. And to your point about the flexibility, right? So being able to tap into that labor force, and not just tap into that labor force, but I think the point you're making that's hugely important is speak to the labor force in terms of what is important to them, right? There's the economics too, but I think the point you're making around flexibility, interest, career growth, you're speaking to human emotions also.
Yeah, and I think the human factor thing is so key, because if you look at 90% of Twitter exchanges around bad customer service interactions come from two things happening. One, the agent not understanding that their role, first and foremost, is to satisfy customers. And two, the customer not trusting the employee to have any power to make them happy. And if we can eliminate those gaps by, one, emphasizing from the moment we start advertising this job, this is about the human connection, all the way to when we manage them to focus on customer-centric measures, and we empower them to operate independently, and we give them, to your point about diversity, we ensure that we have personality types who represent different cultures, different tastes, different demographics. We put all that together, then you're going to show the customer that you care about the human connection. It's going to lead to more harmonious, beneficial interactions on both sides. The customer gets a better experience. The employee feels more valued by their boss and less stressed by the customer. They're more likely to stay as well. And so I think that's big. And yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I was going to say this ties back in, by the way, to your earlier comment about treating a career versus a transaction.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, so if we look at some of the other areas that I would recommend that are going to be really important. So one of the things is really stopping up looking at the contact center as a single hire or a single role. So one, you want to start to look at the fact that there are going to be different, whether it's you're looking at BPOs that you want to work with or whether you're looking at different employees you want to work with, you want to make sure that you're looking at, you have different tasks and different focuses within your contact center. Again, it's not just answering a certain set of calls. It does so much more right now. And so really understanding that you have to hire different types of people for different work. And so you want to make sure you're doing that. But then two, also remembering that you're not just trying to hire someone to answer your phones. You're trying to hire someone to be an ambassador for your customers and spend a lot of time helping to build your business. And you need to articulate those things clearly, not just in your job copy, but in the way you train, the way you manage, the way you give them autonomy throughout their work as well. And so it's really important to build that out. And I actually wanted to give you a chance here to talk about how TP looks at this, because certainly, you're managing customer service operations for a variety of different companies around the globe. You, of course, have a different, set of workers that you have to manage. So how do you do this in a way where you make them feel as if they're contributing differently to different tasks as opposed to they're just one replaceable person in a million?
That's a great question, Brian. And you've hit on a lot of these. The first and foremost thing is you've got to is almost like Maslow's hierarchy, right? You've got to start with food, shelter, and clothing. And in order to fulfill that basic need, you've got to have the right economic proposition. The right economic proposition means you've got to pay a fair wage. It starts, that's the base of the hierarchy. So, and particularly in the US market, where when you look at the contact center space and you look at what wages have been over the years, there really has not been significant progression, and I would say parity in wage for contact center folks versus a living wage. So that's the basics, right? So you got to get the basics right. And then you've hit on the next points, the points on flexibility, the ability to work from home or work the hours that makes the most sense, creating an engaging work at home environment, because it is different. It is absolutely different. It's not the same. By the way, it's also not for everyone. Mm-hmm. The individuals that might want to and prefer and have a large preference for coming in center, and to the extent that, with the right governance, with the right health and safety measures in place, you can facilitate that and provide that option. So that option is hugely important. Engagement is the kind of the third part of that, or the next piece. So now we talk about the engagement where you can help an individual be an individual and show the individuality. And when that comes out, that creates a thing of beauty for the individual and for the interactions and engagements they facilitate. And so that's kind of the third piece of this, is creating that a highly engaged workforce. And we made a lot of effort in the US market to for that and create an employee base that was highly engaged and enthused. We ended up last year and this year too, being awarded a Great Place to Work, which is, it's based a survey based on employees' input, which is hugely important because it manifests itself. All what we do manifests itself in that way. I think those are, the broad strokes. I don't want to hog this conversation, but I do want to take another question that does tie in, and the question, very apropos to our conversation right now, is this is to you, Brian, do you have suggestions on partnering with a BPO to help alleviate this issue?
Yeah, and so there's a few things that you want to be looking for. One, they need to have an established position around distributed work, because the fact is that, as much as we kind of think that we've gotten an okay result from work from home, our data shows that companies are still struggling with things like training, still struggling with things like engagement. And on top of that, remember, the bar has been a little bit lower over the past year. A lot of the focus was on catching up or keeping up with volume or just getting ourselves going in a chaotic time. And if we want to get to that next step where we're actually using our agents to gather actionable feedback about customers, make sales at opportune times, really redesign our experiences based on what customers are going through, it's going to take more than getting by. It's going to take legitimate engagement and buy-in, as well as not only that, but you need the technology to make it happen too. When people are working around the globe, you need ability to look at data, assess quality, provide AI to navigate the knowledge base to people who are working independently without support. So if you don't have someone who's already built a framework, both as far as recruiting, coaching, onboarding, engaging, and of course supporting with technology for the distributed world, it's not going to work very well at all. The other thing too is you want to have people that are looking at it from a specific functional basis. Now I'll admit, when we, even prior to COVID, what I looked for when I was looking for a good outsourcing company was not, we have this many great clients, we have this many agents in this nice office, but instead we have specialists in social media. We have specialists in tier one interactions. We have specialists in VIP sales. We have representation in these different time zones and these different cultures. really understanding that they have enough breadth of their offering that they can allow you to specialize. Because if you look at something like smart shoring, where instead of just looking at an all-in-one scenario, or instead of looking at the superficial, oh, I need Spanish speakers, so let me go to a Spanish-speaking country, instead looking at, let me look at all the different offerings this partner has and sort of cherry pick which is going to be the most strategically valuable for me. They have to be someone that's specialized enough to allow that to happen. And do it at a time when you're going to have even less potential face time with the individual agents, which means that you have to have even more trust that they have the right processes in place, that they have the right talent in place and the right mindset. And then, a key thing there is obviously looking for alignment of metrics. One of the performance becomes so much more important now because, you, again, without the ability to qualitatively look over shoulders or qualitatively listen into every phone call in both the world of remote work as well as digital communication, you have to rely on the data. You have to rely on the numbers to tell you what's going right or wrong, and making sure that they're looking at the numbers in the same way you are and can spot the same performance gaps and deliver the right training and identify problems. That's going to be extremely important when it comes to the BPO space. And I'm also curious from your perspective, what, Teleperformance is doing right here to make sure that, you're allowing, that you're supporting kind of what I just talked about.
So I can go through actually another whole 30 minutes on that, on exactly what we're doing. I think you hit on the big points, right? There's an alignment of values, of cultures. There's an alignment of outcomes, or an importance of alignment of outcomes. There's an alignment on understanding what's the best mix of human-assisted, technology-assisted, the blend. And technology, by the way, not just to assist the agents, not just to assist customers, but also the agents. And you kind of build that solution together, leveraging work at home, leveraging in-centers, smart shoring, all those elements. Then obviously, the humanization piece is key. And we started this conversation. You talk about creating the right profile from an EQ perspective. That human connection for an employee, for an interaction, is probably the single most important thing in many different ways, and it's tough to do, right? I do want to take a couple of other questions, by the way, real quick, if you don't mind, Brian. If you folks have questions, thank you for the submissions. I see them coming through. Feel free to send them. This question is, what are the top 5 tips for advertising call center agents in today's markets?
Yep. Okay. So first and foremost, so one of the things, there's a great one because it does matter. So right off the bat, you want to basically use, as I mentioned earlier, human language in recruiting. So emphasizing that there's going to be the role of caring for customers, building, really what's going to happen is twofold. One, you're going to get the people that actually want to do more than just answer calls off a script. But 2, you're going to really set the message that this is going to be someone who does require the right demeanor, the right swagger, the right charisma for this kind of role as well. So that's certainly step number 1. 2 is emphasizing diversity. And we touched on this earlier, but the idea is not only are we at a time where it helps us attract better talent who's historically been disenfranchised or from certain parts of the recruiting process, which is always important to overcome, but also at a time when human connection matters more, you want to have more humans represented in your organization to be able to adapt to them. So that's going to be really key as well. 3 is clearly identifying the career pathing. And this also does sort of speak to one of the questions we got, which is how do you kind of retain and ensure that agents are invested in your company over the long term? You have to make sure that they know where this is going and that there's a clear measurable benchmarks there. Because if you want that consultative person, guess what? That consultative person does not want to answer phones for 2 years and then go find another job. They want to know it's going somewhere. And so that's going to be really key. The other thing is being very transparent about what your approach is, because there are people like we said that want to work from home. There are people that like the office. There's people that like a mix. There's people that want to work remotely, not from home. They want to travel. And there's no use lying or trying to say that you're going to do something that you're not. Be very clear about what your policy is toward them, and you're going to attract people who fit into your environment very well. And the last one is emphasizing the need for creative thinking. And that's a twofold thing. So one, it's really making that clear in the advertisement that you actually want to make sure that you're hiring for problem solving and creative thinking. But two, it also means minimizing the way you use AI and automation to sort through candidates, because again, the more we get into the human factors, the more we need human eyeballs analyzing our candidates and making sure that we're hiring the right people for the role.
Spot on. Thank you. And we're getting several questions. I don't think we'll get through all of them. We might be just over.
Yeah, I'm looking. There's a crazy list. We'll be happy to answer these afterwards, the ones we don't get to.
We can do just one more real quick, Brian, real briefly. What are the 3 objectives, roles of the contact center in the next, going forward, 2022?
For the contact center or for employees? So
roles of the contact center is what the question asks.
So first and foremost, it's going to be the number one is data. You're going to be using it as a pipeline into what customers are looking for, what triggers their buying habits, what triggers their churn, what triggers their advocacy, using it as a well for data about every part of your business. That's the number one objective for the contact center right now, because they're listening at scale in a way that no written survey or no market research event is ever going to do. The second thing is actually transitioning to creating a real version of loyalty as opposed to tolerant retention. So one of the things that we've seen is that thanks to the rise of e-commerce, thanks to continued globalization, it's easier than ever to steal someone's customers away just by offering a slightly cooler product or slightly better price. And therefore, these longtime customers that we've had that we thought were always going to be ours, we really are going to find out the difference between whether they are actually just loyal or whether they're just tolerant until someone better comes along. And so as the pipeline is speaking to these customers, it really needs to play a role in driving a meaningful amount of loyalty for them. And then third is ultimately going to be increasing the customer lifetime value of each individual customer. And there's different ways you can think about that. So one is obviously by virtue of having sale. I mentioned earlier how the agent needs to be a multifaceted one-stop shop person who can do service and sales at the same time. Obviously, if you can generate sales from the contact center, great. And that's going to, of course, boost the CLV of a customer. But also, you can also look at it from the reverse, that if you minimize how often they're going to complain, you're going to minimize their cost drain on your contact center as well. And I think that even though most traditional CLV calculations don't really take cost into account, I think we need to take it into account and say, if this customer, instead of calling 5 times at $10 a call, costing us $50 to use a product, if they only call 1 time, we've now saved $40 from that customer. Suddenly, we're now getting more value. We're getting more bang for our buck for that customer. That's a very appropriate way to look at CLV in the grand scheme of things. And it's certainly something that by virtue of offering meaningful human service, being proactive, leveraging digital channels, and ensuring that the care we deliver is great, it's something that is very viable for the contact center as well.
Great. Thank you, Brian. I really love a phrase you just used in closing, and I'll leave everybody with this thought: meaningful human service. I think it encapsulates what we've talked about so very well in terms of developing the right kind of platforms for engagement, for career, for development, for individuals, attracting the right kind of folks. Meaningful. I love that. That was beautiful. Brian, thank you so much. For folks that submitted questions we couldn't get to, we'll respond to them. As a reminder, there are many other such TP Talks, and you can actually, Brian's participated in some in the past, so you can rewind a little bit. There's also a really good white paper on your resource section around 4 dynamics that are impacting and ways to alleviate it in the US market, the labor dynamics. Feel free to download that. Thank you very much, Brian. Very insightful, getting some really good commentary on the Q&A too. Appreciate everybody's attendance, and hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you for attending today's TP Talks. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.